All right, thanks again for joining us here tonight. Thanks for joining us online. We're going to wrap up part 2 of the Divinely Designed Immune System talk. And where we left off last week, we were talking about the germ theory of disease. And remember how it's quoted is that you should be able to take a sick animal, isolate the pathogen, whether it's a virus or a bacteria, take that, culture it, and then inject it into a healthy animal and make them sick. But that's not what the actual germ theory or what the postulates say. They say you can culture it and then inject it into a susceptible host. So we were talking about what causes susceptibility, because we went over this and talking about the Diamond Princess and multiple different respiratory viruses and things like that show about a 12% rate of susceptibility to transmission. So it's never 100%. We assume that it's 100%. I think a lot of us do, but you guys have all been there where, you know, everybody in your house is sick and somehow you're not sick, but then you've been there where everybody else in your house is fighting off whatever bugs are out there, and somebody sneezes on the bus, you know, 20 seats away, and all of a sudden you're sick. So it boils down to susceptibility, and we like to boil it down to 3 main causes of susceptibility. We talk about nutritional deficiencies. So it's susceptibility is usually due to a deficiency. Okay, so it's nutritional deficiencies, genetic deficiencies, which account for far less than 1% actually. If you walked in here, or chances are if you're joining us online tonight, you don't fit into that 1% that are the genetic susceptible, okay? But the functional deficiencies, that's probably the majority, and nutritional deficiencies actually probably a majority of contributors. So we'll talk a little bit about the nutritional deficiencies, and then when we talk about functional deficiencies, we're mainly talking about subluxation, because this is a chiropractic talk. So we're going to talk about, if you don't know what a subluxation is, remember the bones of the spine are supposed to be protecting the nervous system. But those bones are movable parts. We know that they can move out of their normal position, put pressure on the nerve they were supposed to be protecting, and then that chokes off an information message going to a part of the body. And we're going to talk about the different parts to the neuroimmune system. So the part of the immune system that links up with the nervous system directly and indirectly. So there's 2 different routes for communication between the nervous system and the immune system. So certain parts of the immune system are directly controlled by the nervous system, meaning they actually receive they have neuroreceptors for those neurotransmitters, okay? And anywho, we'll get into that in a little bit. But we're talking about, when we're talking about those functional deficiencies, those subluxations, there are 4 main causes. We break it down into cumulative physical stress, cumulative emotional stress, and cumulative chemical stresses, okay? And those all have an effect on your immune system. And then, of course, trauma, which would be excessive physical, emotional, or chemical stresses. So there's cumulative types of stresses that kind of build up over time, and then you get the straw that breaks the camel's back. Or there's just a camel gets dropped on you, you know, that trauma. So you don't have a drug deficiency, but that's kind of how we've been taught to treat these deficiencies, at least in the Western Hemisphere, because a lot of the symptoms to a vitamin or mineral deficiency can be treated with drugs, okay? So like blindness or deficiencies in eyesight, for example, a lot of times a vitamin A deficiency, but a lot of times they're not gonna mention it. They're not even gonna address it. We'll just slap glasses on the person and call it a day. And the underlying cause, if it is a deficiency, of course, that's going to continue to get worse with time. And if it's something like, a vitamin A deficiency, it has far-reaching, impact on the immune system. So it increases the rate of severe infection or the likelihood of severe infection. It increases issues with pregnancies, maternal mortality, all these kind of things. So if that deficiency isn't addressed, the underlying cause, it gets worse with time, okay? So macronutrient deficiencies, I know this is very small, but things like iron deficiencies, we talked a little bit about how iron deficiency can impact the body's response to a bug, because not the first line of defense, if you remember from last week, is those barriers and those mucous membranes. But what was the second line of defense? The fever, okay? And iron is called ferritin in the body, one of the versions, and it's used to help generate the heat to burn off a bug. Because remember, those bugs, those viruses or bacteria are very temperature specific. So if we raise that temperature up a degree or two, usually it's going to kill. Within 48 hours, it's been shown 99% of those bugs are going to get killed if we raise that temperature up a degree or two. So if we're deficient in iron, it kind of prolongs that process. Usually it's within 48 hours that those bugs are going to get burned off, 99% of them. But whoever's deficient in iron, it usually drags on that process for, days to weeks sometimes. So because of menstrual cycles and things like that, ladies a lot of times are, at least at some times of the month, deficient in iron. And what we'll find a lot of times is in the winter, especially when those bugs are going around and we're indoors and we're not out there getting the sun and breathing the fresh air, we're claustrophobic and we're probably vitamin D deficient. Then also, if we're anemic or iron deficient, when your body tries to spike that fever up, it doesn't get it as high as it should or it wants to. And then something like this, where it'll spike and then it'll come down. It'll spike and it'll come down. Instead of spiking it all the way up to where it needs to and then burning it off, it'll just kind of go up and down, mildly over a week or more sometimes. So a lot of complaints come in about that, well, I've been fighting this bug for weeks. How come, the kids are all over it within a couple days and I've been fighting it for a couple weeks? It's deficiencies. In this case, a lot of times it's iron deficiencies. So we like to address that usually with diet, right? And if you're not a big red meat eater, there are other things that you can supplement. That's why they call it a supplement. It's not going to take the place of something, but it's meant to supplement if you're deficient, okay? Just to get you back to that sufficiency state. So another big nutritional deficiency is calcium, because the soil has been depleted over time. We can eat, the same amount of spinach has like 37% less calcium than it used to. And a lot of the calcium we get, we've been taught that it's coming from dairy. It doesn't. Most of the calcium that you're getting is actually from green veggies and leafy greens like spinach, okay? So if we're deficient in calcium, again, there's a lot of other cofactors that calcium plays a part in with the immune system that increases our likelihood of infection and decreases our ability to fight off that infection, okay? So those are the deficiencies in the nutritional sense. When we talk about the deficiencies in the physical or functional sense, then again, we're talking about subluxation, because we're talking about how the nervous system impacts or controls, directly or indirectly, the immune system. So there are multiple different cell types that are within what they call now, it used to be called the nervous system, now it's called the neuroimmune system, because they are nerve fibers, nerve types, but they also, like I said, have those immune receptors, and then the cells that they communicate in the bloodstream have receptors for neurotransmitters. So what a neurotransmitter is, if you think a thought, move my arm, okay? That message has to travel from your brain down the spinal cord and out a nerve down your arm to those muscles to say, move your arm, flex that bicep. And along that route, it's not just one long nerve cell. There's many different cells, nerve cells or fibers that link up axon to dendrite, and they pass that information by way of these neuroreceptors. So this cell fires and it sends those neuroreceptors across this gap to the neurotransmitters to the receptors, right? And then that message continues on down, being sent like that over gaps between nerve cells. There are also those same receptors on certain immune cells in the bloodstream, okay? And how it works is, you imagine we're in a tunnel here, that's the blood vessel, and now there are a million different cells or more bouncing down this tunnel, and along the tunnel there are receptors, okay? That immune cell bounces up and it connects to that dendrite, and it receives information directly from a part of the brain or the spinal cord, okay? So it's receiving information from the nervous system, which the brain and different parts of the nervous system at all times are kind of monitoring and controlling and coordinating all the different cells being coordinated in the body, okay? So if we've got an infection, let's say in our foot, all right, that information gets sent up to the brain either directly by these cells that we're talking about bouncing around, these mast cells, bouncing around inside the blood and connecting to one of those receptors, and then that information from that cell who just encountered an infection gets sent up to the brain, okay? And then the brain will activate, by way of these same cells in the tunnel, certain cells of the immune system that are going to then find their way to that infection, kill it, and then break it down and catalog it. And we talked about the different parts of the immune system being the innate immune system, and that's usually the cells that just attack stuff and eat it. And then the acquired immune system, remember, which is after it's been attacked and eaten, then it's the information is passed on to a memory cell, whether it's a T cell or a B cell. Those memory cells then create a memory of it and create antibodies so that it's acquired immunity. Now when we get exposed to that bug again, we've got these cells floating around in the bloodstream. They get connected to that nervous system, that nerve along the tunnel, and then they already have those antibodies made, and they get that information saying, make your way to the foot, okay? And it'll make its way through the full circulation to the foot and then deliver those antibodies, all right? We didn't know this even 20 years ago, that this is kind of how it worked, okay? So that's the direct contact with the immune system. I'm sorry, with the nervous system. I keep saying that. So the immune system is under the direct control of the brain and the nervous system. But it's also under indirect control, okay? So let's say, again, your immune system becomes aware of an infection. Let's just go back to the foot, all right? Those immune cells attack it. They get record of it. And now that gets passed up to the brain, again, by way of either chemical signals up to the brain or by linking up to those cells. Anyways, the message gets up to the brain. And now the brain will tell certain organs or glands, like the liver or the thymus, you've got to produce more of this type of cell, okay? So if we need macrophages, which is the innate part of the immune system, because they'll go and they'll eat that infection. They'll kill it, they'll attack it, and they'll eat it, okay? And then once those cells are done, then again, a signal gets sent either chemically or directly to the brain and the nervous system that now we need some memory cells. So then the brain tells the spleen to make this type of white blood cell, which then makes its way to interact with those macrophages in the foot and get that information and then make those antibodies, okay? So there's direct and there's indirect control going on there. Indirect is usually, okay, it's telling another part to make that cell, and then that message gets sent, and that organ or that gland manufactures those cells, and then they get there by way of the circulation. As opposed to that cell directly contacts the brain, the nervous system sends that information saying, you need to go to the foot, and it just goes there through the circulation, okay? So direct and indirect control, which again is why all these studies that you're going to see, like the 10X study, or I can't remember the guy's name, but there's a study that shows a 200% increase in immune response in people who are under chiropractic care. That's just one way of looking at it, right? It's not a 200% increase. It's, you guys are normal. This is the normal, right? The normal is your body was meant to function at 100%. And if your body's communicating, that nervous system is getting the message out to all the parts the way it's supposed to, that's how it's supposed to be. That's just normal, 100%, okay? Which means everybody else is just 200% less than normal. Does that make sense? So it's not that we're increasing what God made by 200%. No, we're just bringing it back to the normal. That's how I always look at things. So those functional deficiencies, it starts in the nervous system, okay? When we look at the spine, again, it's just there protecting the brain, the spinal cord, and all those peripheral nerves that carry a message out to the spleen or the thymus or the liver. All these organs have immune function, all right? The liver, for example, is huge in fighting viruses. And what you'll notice is it has also digestive functions, right? It produces bile, it emulsifies fats, it does digestive functions. But when you're fighting a bug, what'll happen is your body shuts down, so your brain sends the message to the liver to shut down those digestive functions so that it can ramp up the enzymes and focus on the immune functions, all right? So it'll shut that down for a short time, and that's why people lose their appetite when they're fighting a virus, because the body is functioning normally, but it's focusing on that immune threat, and it'll just temporarily shut down those digestive functions, okay? Just to be able to jack up the enzymes, like I said, that are very good for breaking down, that the body needs to break down those viruses or bacteria. Enzymes do that. Yes, the cell attacks it, but the cell uses those enzymes to break down those proteins and the glycoprotein walls. They're pretty tough in a virus. So it's going to take some heavy-duty machinery to break it down. And that's what an enzyme is. It's a protein machine that will attack that and break it down, okay? It literally unzips the protein, breaks it apart, and then the cell eats what's inside, catalogs it, and sends it on. So the nervous system, it's the most important system that we have. But we link it together with the immune system, and we call it the neuroimmune system now. And that, like I said, just 20 years ago, we didn't even know this stuff. So that was cutting edge, like when I was in chiropractic college or just getting out of chiropractic college. I remember the first textbook called Neuroimmunology, which was the textbook that I had up there, that picture. That came out, actually, I think the year that I graduated from chiropractic college. So before that, it wasn't put together, you know. So this is a cutting edge field that really we didn't have the technology to look at it and to test it and to understand it. But again, it all kind of starts with that the nervous system, that brain sending those messages. I did it again, didn't I? That brain sending those messages directly to those cells. And it does the same thing with all the rest of the cells. We just group those cells together in tissues and organs and glands, okay? So yeah, we've got nerves that carry messages to organs like the heart or the liver or the lungs to tell them what to do. But it's actually kind of branched off so that each cell in that organ is receiving either directly or indirectly information from those nerves, okay? And that's why if we have a subluxation, which is that bone being out of position, putting pressure on that nerve, if that nerve's going to the liver, for example, the liver isn't going to get that message that, okay, we need upregulation of these enzymes. The liver just keeps on doing its normal digestive function while the immune cells need these enzymes, okay? So they don't get it. Now they're going to be, deficient, or they're going to be hampered in their ability to respond to that infection, all right? Same thing if we're looking at the thymus, which is responsible for producing a lot of the innate white blood cells that eat the infection, okay? If that thymus doesn't get that information, if there's a subluxation choking off that information going to that thymus, or if there's a subluxation, go back to the thymus. Okay, it's just not going to make the white blood cells that it needs to. But let's think about this. Like if we go back to our foot and we've got an infection in the foot, okay, how did that infection get started? Because normally the other foot's not infected, right? Because that information's getting from that foot up to the brain, and there's constant communication there. So an infection can only take place when there's a breakdown in the communication, and now the body is slow to respond to an increase in the growth of, bacteria or virus, all right? We talked about the function of those bacteria and those viruses in our body is to break down dead or dying material. So if those cells are damaged, like you cut your foot or you drop something on it, and those cells are damaged, those old cells are going to die off, and they need to be broken down, and that's part of the job of those bacteria. The body uses those to break down those cells. But then once those cells are broken down and the bacteria has done its job, the immune system is right there to quell that bacteria from exploding in population and ending up with an infection. So there had to be some breakdown in the communication, right? So like we talked about, those cells that are in the tunnel of the bloodstream, of those blood vessels, if those cells that have the hookups for these immune cells aren't cooperating or communicating back and forth to the brain, now we've got an area of the bloodstream that is susceptible to a buildup of those bacteria and infection, okay? So it's going to spread to other areas, obviously, through the bloodstream, but you'll usually see that with blood poisoning, okay? So this is kind of like the preemptive strike to blood poisoning. Is if we keep that information going back and forth to the brain from those tunnels, the blood vessels, then we don't end up with that explosion of bacteria growth and end up with that infection in the foot, okay? So that's just the benefits of getting the spine checked and removing that interference. It doesn't make you a superhero. It just brings you back to what you were supposed to be, okay? So subluxation, just remember, we saw University of Colorado did research on this back in the 90s, and they found that a subluxation, so that bone out of place, putting pressure on the nerve, it can be as little as 1 millimeter of misalignment is enough to put pressure on a nerve, all right? And what they found was that'll decrease that nerve's function by up to 60%. So we've got maybe 40% of those messages making it from that infected foot up to the brain, telling it, hey, we need this, this, and this, okay? So the response isn't going to be what it's supposed to, all right? That's a deficiency. That's an immunocompromised person. That's a person that's susceptible. You inject this person with that bug that we've cultured in the dish, they're going to be one of those 12% because they're susceptible, okay? If that person is under, good specific chiropractic care, and they're looking at that nervous system all the time and making sure that all the interference is clear, that person isn't susceptible. It's a 200% difference. So Masha and Dasha, you guys remember this? Okay. So Masha and Dasha were born in 1950, Soviet Russia. It was under control of the communists at the time. They were taken from their mother. These are Siamese twins. They share a bloodstream, blood supply, but each of them has their own spine, okay? They share some organs in the lower half, but each has their own heart, their own lungs, and some of the their own liver and some of their own stomachs, and then it joins together for excretion, okay? So crazy, but they were taken from their mom at birth, and mom was told that they died. And then they were put in an institution and they were studied. And what they found was, I'm going to get them mixed up. So Dasha is the one here, and then Masha, she had kind of grown out at an angle. So she had a curvature in her spine, which they thought might have played some part to the fact that she would get sick, whereas Dasha didn't. So Masha got chicken pox. Dasha didn't. They shared the bloodstream, okay? One got spots and a fever, the other didn't. What else? It was influenza. So one got sick, the other didn't. They share a bloodstream. The germ theory kind of works on the germ theory of disease, kind of works through the bloodstream. And a lot of times, when respiratory viruses even, it works through the bloodstream. So I would have expected, because they share that bloodstream and that blood supply, that if one gets exposed to a bug and she's susceptible and gets that disease, that the other one is going to have it. But that wasn't the case. What they found was the one with the straighter spine, Dasha, she was mostly healthy, whereas Masha was often ill because, again, her spine there was interference there with that message being sent from her brain down to those parts of her body. So she was always sick, whereas Dasha was mostly healthy, okay? Oh yeah, it was influenza. Oh, it was measles, I'm sorry. So it wasn't chickenpox, it was measles that Masha developed measles, Dasha didn't, okay? Masha got influenza, Dasha didn't. And again, everything that we have known up to this point about the immune system would tell us, okay, the immune system functions through the blood. So if somebody, is attached bloodstream to another person, that person gets sick and you share blood, you're going to get sick. But again, it's not about the bloodstream. It's not just about the bloodstream. It's about the immune system. So that's why we look at those two kind of as one thing, okay? And this, again, is just a chiropractic banner for why we should get people checked for subluxation. Because if we got subluxation, there's probably, even if you had you were attached to your twin at birth, you're going to have a 200% better immune response than your twin if you don't have subluxation as opposed to if you did have subluxation, okay? So, the immune system and the ability for it to fight off bugs like the flu is how chiropractic got its start in Minnesota and a lot of the upper Midwest, actually. Back in the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, what happened was we had a chiropractic hospital in Iowa, which is Davenport, Iowa, where Palmer Chiropractic College started. And they compared their stats. They had a full hospital staff, doctors and nurses, but everybody who checked in there got analyzed and tested and diagnosed by the medical staff, and then they would be treated with chiropractic, specific chiropractic. At the time, it was upper cervical, so it was just Atlas at the time. They called it hole-in-one, which just that C1 vertebrae where the brain stem comes down through it. And what they found was in Iowa, for example, they had the medical hospitals in Iowa were reporting that they had a total of 93,590 flu cases and 6,000 deaths, which is 1 out of 15 people died. But in Iowa, 4,735 saw the chiropractic hospital, and they only had 6 deaths, which was 1 out of 789. So 0.13% versus 6.7%. And you can see in New York, Oklahoma, there was another state, I can't remember, Kansas they had as well. So a lot of the northern states, when they looked at these numbers, the state, at the time, people were getting arrested for doing chiropractic. They were getting jailed for doing chiropractic because they called it practicing medicine without a license. Well, they licensed them after this. You couldn't get thrown in jail for practicing chiropractic and treating, which they weren't treating flu, okay? We don't, in chiropractic, we don't treat a disease. What we do is we find that subluxation and we adjust it. And we just understand that the body's going to function better without that subluxation. If you have a subluxation, you get that adjusted, you just immediately increased your body's function. You immediately increased your body's immune response, okay? So I just want to leave you with that thought, all right? And again, I know you guys have been checked, but if you're online and you haven't been checked for subluxation by a chiropractor, even if you've been to a chiropractor before, most chiropractors don't even check for subluxation. They do what I call the flying 7, which is they bring somebody in, you say, okay, what's going on? All right, whatever it is, I'm going to grab your butt, I'm going to grab your shoulder, lay you on your side, wrench you one way, flip you over, wrench you the other way, put you on your face, do 3 cracks up the middle, put you on your back, spin your head left, spin it right. And that was 7 moves. We call the flying 7, and it just manipulates every joint in the spine. What these guys were doing was specific. Okay, there's a difference between a general manipulation and a specific adjustment. If you have a subluxation, it's specific. It's just one segment. All right, so why on earth would you manipulate every joint in the spine if you just have one subluxation? Maybe you have 2. But most of the people in this study had one subluxation. They just had that atlas, that first cervical. Meaning BJ and that era, they were only adjusting one bone 3-dimensionally back to its normal position there. And they were getting results like that, okay? And if you look at some of those green books, there's pages and pages and thousands of case studies of people with flu, with epilepsy, blindness, deafness, cancers of all, just these crazy things. Just this last week, I had a patient come in with a fatty tumor on his neck, and we adjusted that first cervical, and within a week, it was probably down 50%. Like his body reabsorbed that tumor by 50% in 1 week. I can't wait to see what it looks like this week. But yeah, again, if you haven't been checked, even if you've been to a chiropractor, I would encourage you, get checked. We do it at no charge for the people that tune in and watch us online or show up here. And then we give you 2 free adjustments just for giving us a chance. And we like people to be able to test out the technique, see if it's something that's for you. If it's not, no hard feelings, but at least you got checked, okay? So thanks again for joining us. Thanks for showing up tonight, you guys. Hope you enjoyed this. Next week, it'll be more basic and a little less technical than the neuroimmune system. So thanks again. Have a great evening.